May 27th, 1992. It's a cool night in the Pike National Forest. Chip Reinhardt and his brother Steve have spent an exhausting evening hunting bear in the high mountains.
Hell, it felt like a waste of time.
It was a waste of time.
Empty-handed, they're driving down a steep mountain pass called Old Stage Road.
It was a miserable evening. We were tired, and wet, and ready to go home.
Chip and his brother round a corner and come across a car parked on the side of the road.
When we pulled up, we were curious initially. It was unusual to see a car there. It just did not feel right from the moment we came across the scene.
It looked like the car was abandoned.
Shining their flashlight at the car, the brothers noticed something red and wet splattered across the hood and windshield.
I don't feel good about this.
When we saw the blood around the scene, the hair did stand up on our necks because obviously it was something bad had happened there. And whatever happened had to have happened very recently.
The brothers can't tell if anyone's inside or lurking nearby, and they don't want to stick around to find out.
We were nervous enough that we got out of there and called 911.
Minutes later, a patrol officer arrives. He approaches the car and quickly determines nobody is inside. But outside is a different story.
There was a blood trail leading from the driver's side of the vehicle to the south over the guardrail.
The trail continues down to the mouth of a drainage tunnel.
There was this 90-some foot drainage culvert that ran under the road, and actually the blood trail traveled further into the culvert.
Shining his flashlight into the darkness, the officer spots something lying deep inside.
Dispatch, I found one in the culvert.
When he confirmed that there was a body in there, you wonder what in the world could have transpired in that person's life for that to have happened.
Dispatch notifies Lt.Joe Kenda, homicide detective and head of the Major Crimes Unit.
It's 11:15. It had been a long day at the office, as they often are, and I was ready to leave and go home. And as I started to get up from my chair, the phone rings.
It's Kenda.
And your first thought is, well, I guess I'm not going home, am I? It's time to go back to work.
"20 minutes later, Kenda and one of his detectives arrive on the scene.
The thing that always strikes me the most about homicides, more than anything else, is how quiet they are. Because there's nothing alive in here.
There's a lot of blood on the hood and the windshield. And where's the body? It's in the culvert, sir.
When I looked into the cupboard with a light and looked at the victim, there were devastating, large wounds.
We get some uniforms down here to get this body out?
Is there some clever scientific way to do that? No, there isn't. It's get a hold of him however you can and drag him 40 feet out of that culvert, which is exactly what we did.
Once the body is removed from the culvert, the cause of death is painfully clear.
It was obvious to me this was done with a shotgun.
The victim had a major injury to his right hand, to where he lost a large portion of that hand.
The one whose hand was defensive.
He also had been shot in the upper abdomen area with we once again believe it was birdshot from a shotgun.
Help me roll him over.
When they roll the victim over, Kenda discovers a third gunshot wound.
His left leg is severely damaged by shotgun fire to the point of almost amputation.
So that wound severed his femoral artery. Probably bled out.
The average adult can withstand about 1 minute and 20 seconds of that level of bleeding before you die from loss of blood.
Your wallet. There's plenty of cash. Wasn't a robbery.
The wallet also contains an ID.
Ronald Whitlow.
Ronald Eugene Whitlow, and he is 31 years old.
The photo on the license was very consistent with the appearance of the party that we had at the scene, so we were fairly confident we were dealing with the victim identified as Ron Whitlow.
But how did Ron Whitlow end up dead in the middle of nowhere? To answer that question, Kenda turns his attention to the abandoned vehicle.
Around the car, you see 2 expended shotgun shells. And then that makes sense. The expended casings we see are 20 gauge, more than enough to cause enormous damage to a human body.
The car's exterior is splattered with blood, but the interior appears to be clean. To Kenda, the evidence paints a gruesome picture.
Our man is outside the car when he shot the first time, throwing blood and some human tissue onto the car itself, and also blood on the ground. He then moves to get away from who's shooting at him when he shot a second time. He continues to run and crawls some 40-odd feet into a culvert to escape.
When Kenda's team runs the car's tags, they come back with a lead.
Lieutenant, it comes back to a Ron Whitlow.
Our victim.
Yes.
Kenda expected that the car would turn out to be Ron's. What's surprising is that Ron reported it stolen just 1 day earlier.
Now this changes everything. If he reported this car stolen, how does he now have it back? Or did he have it back? How did this car come to be here if it was stolen from the man who's now been shot to death? This is an enormous complication. This is the first thing we have to resolve.
According to the police report, Ron Whitlow stated that a friend of his had borrowed the car, but never returned it.
Yeah, who do I need to speak to about reporting a stolen vehicle?
I can help you. Need to see some ID, please.
There you are, sir.
When did this happen?
It happened last night. Loaned it out to a friend.
Ron Whitlow reported it stolen on Tuesday morning after he had loaned it to a friend of his he identified as Brian Signor.
The report says he had another friend whose name is Barbara Wilson, and she was with him when Brian borrowed the car. And he was supposed to bring it back, but he never brought it back.
How long did he say he was going to keep the car?
He's supposed to have it back to me already. Now I can't get a hold of him. I don't know where it's at. I don't know what's going on.
Could this be the motive for this crime? Of course it could. But we have no way of knowing that at this point. We need to learn more about these people.
Kenda has his team run background checks on Brian Signor and Barbara Wilson. It turns out that Brian, Barbara, and the victim all live in the same complex.
Graham, can you get information from her, please? Thank you.
Everybody is at this same address. So that's where we need to begin first.
How you doing?
Hi, I'm good.
Are you the manager here?
Yes. Yeah, I am.
You have a Ron Whitlow these days here?
Yeah, he lives over in 1.
We asked the manager what Ron does for a living. She says he's a janitor, but he also does pick up labor jobs at various companies in town that hire day labor people.
Nice guy. pays his rent?
She described him as a good person and thought that he had a lot to offer and was a friendly person.
How about a Brian Signor and a Barbara?
Yeah, Barbara lives in 2, and Brian lives with Ron.
They live together.
Yeah.
Ron Whitlow and Brian Signor had been living together for the past few weeks after meeting on a construction job.
The manager also says they seem to get along most of the time, but certainly not all the time.
According to the manager, the last time she saw Ron, he had complained about Brian and his friend Barbara taking his car.
She says, I know that they borrowed it and they didn't bring it back, and Ron was really pissed about it.
To Kenda, the stolen car is turning from a mystery to a motive.
Brian, at this juncture, appeals to me as somebody that might be part of Ron's death.
It's a suspicion that only grows when Kenda runs a background check on Brian Signor.
We pull Brian Signor's record and we find that yes, he does have an assaultive personality. He has been involved in violent crime in the past. He served time in jail in the past. I'm in need of a suspect, and right now, Brian will do nicely. You planning on sleeping tonight? Maybe you should stay awake. Guess I'm come looking for you.
Colorado Springs police found 30-year-old Ron Whitlow in a culvert beneath a remote mountain road with a trail of blood leading up to Ron's abandoned car. The vehicle presents Lt.Joe Kenda with a baffling clue.
That this car was reported stolen by our victim. How does he now have it back?
The day before he died, Ron told police he had lent his car to his roommate, Brian Signor, and their neighbor, Barbara Wilson. But Brian never returned the car.
I'm thinking that this stolen car has got something to do with this murder. Brian might be part of this, and might be part of Ron's death.
When Kenda knocks on the door of the apartment Brian and Ron shared, there's no answer. So he moves on to Barbara Wilson's place.
We, of course, knock on Barbara's door. Nobody's there.
Just give me a call if any of them come back.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
No problem.
With Brian and Barbara nowhere to be found, Kenda prepares to notify Ron's next of kin. It's a grim task, but one that can serve an important purpose.
You're doing two things. You're explaining to them that they've lost a loved one, but you're also asking for information.
Hello?
Yes, is this Pam?
This is she.
This is Detective Kenda from the Colorado Springs Police Department. Now, I'm sorry I have some terrible news. Your brother Ron was killed.
How do you react when somebody you love dies, you know? I mean, it's not like it wasn't always a worry, but it still hurts. I cried.
Pam is clearly devastated by the news of her brother's death, but it's important for Kenda to glean as much information as he can.
I know this is very difficult, but can you tell me a little bit about Ron?
Ron loved everybody. Everybody was his friend, no matter what. He just opened his heart to everybody and his home.
Ron Whitlow and his 5 siblings grew up in Santa Rosa and Dinuba, California. Their upbringing was far from ideal.
We had a real dysfunctional family. I was the oldest, and he was only 2 years younger than I was. I was not able to protect him like I did my younger sisters and brothers, and so he got the physical abuse and a lot of wrath as well.
She described that he had a past, possibly drug and alcohol problem, but he'd already beat it once, and she was believing that he was actually doing very well.
He was going to AA. He was trying to understand all his anger that he had inside. He wanted a fresh start, so he was looking to settle down, get his life together.
Have you ever heard him talk about a couple of his friends named Barbara and Brian?
No, I've never heard of them.
I hadn't seen him in a long time, but I just knew that he was doing really good and he was happy.
She has no direct knowledge of what he's been up to lately, so there's no point in us pressing her for information at this juncture, other than to assure her that we will make every effort to bring the person responsible for this crime to justice.
No sooner has he let go of the handset than it rings.
This is Kenda.
The manager from the motel calls and said, "Hey, Barbara's home. I just saw her pull in. She's in her room."
Great, we'll be right there. Barbara Wilson?
Yes.
I'm Detective Kenda. This is Detective Graham.
Come on in.
We explained to her why we're talking to her.
Ma'am, you know Ryan Whitlow?
Yeah, he lives next door.
Unfortunately, the reason why we're here is that Ryan was murdered.
Oh my God, what happened?
She's horrified by the death of her acquaintance, Ron.
I understand that you borrowed his car recently.
Yes, Brian offered to take me to get my license so I could work.
She says, "I'm a licensed practical nurse, but I don't have a Colorado license. I just came here from another state, and I needed to go to the Board of Nursing, which is in Denver, Colorado, so I can work."
Brian agreed to drive Barbara to Denver,
That'd probably be the best thing to do.
but he wasn't certain Ron would lend them his car.
Hey man, are you ready to go?
Dude, can we borrow your car? We'll be back by 5. You better be back by 5. Thanks, man.
Thank you, Ron.
But according to Barbara, on the way back from Denver, they lost track of time.
She says, "We stopped at a few bars and we had a couple drinks. Then it was late, and we were past the time when we were supposed to give it back."
She claims when it finally dawned on Brian how late they were, he began to panic.
Why did he get upset? Well, he's afraid of Ron. He said that Ron has a bad temper, and Ron would hurt him, maybe, if we took this car back late.
But before Brian had time to make up an excuse, their situation went from bad to worse.
We got stopped by the police for making an illegal U-turn.
Got your driver's license registration handy?
Well, the issue is this is my friend's car.
Yashra said, "Well, we got two options here. I can impound this car for no registration, no proof of insurance, or you can park it and tell your roommate where it is."
Brian and Barbara had no choice but to park Ron's car on a roadside in the middle of Colorado Springs.
They leave the car a short distance from where they live, and they don't see it again, according to Barbara.
So how did the car get from the city all the way to the remote crime scene? Did Ron find it himself?
We know that our victim's car is parked at the old stage road, and we know that it's covered in our victim's blood. We still don't know how it got there.
Nor is it clear where Barbara and Brian went after they abandoned Ron Whitlow's car.
What were you doing on the night of the 27th?
Well, I was with Brian, and we were with Stephanie and Trisha.
Barbara says that until she and Brian could figure out how to explain everything to Ron, they decided to lay low at the home of Stephanie Richardson and her girlfriend Trisha Drew.
They had some friends that lived next door, and they needed to move that night.
How about this one?
So me, Brian, Trisha, and Stephanie all helped this couple move, and we didn't get done until 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I appreciate your help.
I'm so sorry to hear about Ron. Anything that I can do to help.
After speaking with Barbara, Kenda heads back to the office to see if her story checks out.
There's a traffic stop that takes place. We identify who stopped him. We speak to that officer.
How you doing? This is Detective Kenda. Quick question for you. I was told that you pulled over a blue Dodge. The driver was Brian Signor.
He explains the story, pretty much matches Barbara to a T.
The traffic officer confirms Barbara and Brian left Ron Whitlow's car on the street. Now Kenda looks into the rest of their alibi. He starts with Stephanie Richardson and Trisha Drew.
Come on in.
Got a couple of ladies here to see you.
Thank you. Stephanie and Trisha. I'm Detective Kenda, Detective Graham. We just need to ask you a few questions if you don't mind.
We meet Stephanie and we meet Trisha at the same time. They're a lesbian couple that lives together in an apartment.
As a matter of procedure, we need to split you guys up. That's all right?
Yeah.
So if you don't mind going with Detective Graham. Have a seat. Can you tell me what you were doing on the night of May 27th?
Yeah, me and Stephanie were helping some neighbors move.
Can you tell me who all was there?
It was Trisha and me, and then our friends Brian and Barbara.
And about how long were you guys out there, from what time to what time?
I think we got together around 8.
And you finished up?
Wow, probably not until like 1 a.m. I would say. It was like...
They both independently of each other say that they were helping their neighbors move.
Stephanie and Trisha's statements seem to corroborate Brian and Barbara's alibi.
If this is all true, they're not killing our victim, they're with these women. That puts us into a different arena.
Just like that, Lieutenant Kenda has gone from having 2 potential murder suspects to having none at all.
Homicide investigation is a series of highs and lows. You get very high and then you get very low when things aren't working, and right now things aren't.
It won't be long before the investigation reaches new heights. Only this time, it will take Kenda in a completely unexpected direction. Lieutenant Joe Kenda is investigating the shooting of 30-year-old Ron Whitlow. A dispute over Ron's car indicated neighbor Barbara Wilson and roommate Brian Signor might be responsible for the crime. But both Barbara and Brian have been scratched from the suspect list.
Brian's out, Barbara's out, everybody's out.
Absent any credible leads, Kenda turns to his former prime suspect for help.
We go to where Brian is working.
Brian?
Yeah.
Detective Kenda.
Hi.
We say the usual question, well, what do you think happened here? Somebody wanted Ron dead. Why would that be true? Says, I don't know. I saw some guys that Ron had some heated exchanges with verbally.
You know why he was having these altercations?
He owed a lot of guys money from buying drugs.
So Ron was into drugs?
Yeah.
Brian comes forward with the specter of narcotics. He says, well, you know, Ron used coke. You mean cocaine? Yeah.
Brian explains that Ron had recently backslid and had begun abusing narcotics again. He also claims Ron bought most of his drugs on credit, but didn't always get around to paying for them.
What's going on, man? Looking to see if maybe you could front me some?
Front you some? I tell you what, I'm gonna go ahead and give it to you, but by the end of the week, I need all of my every bit of it.
Oh yeah, man, you know I'm good for it. Thanks, bro.
You think back to that crime scene. Okay, the car's facing downhill, as if it's expecting a car to drive up from town to meet. Does he expect it to be paid? And Ron has no money? And it results in gunfire? Criminals, if they can't get the money, they'll take your blood. They're making a statement to other people that owe them money. Is that what happened here?
Kenda presses Brian to tell him who Ron's dealers were, but he says he doesn't know.
You know who would be Stephanie. She would know.
Why would Stephanie know?
Her and Ron did drugs together.
He says, well, you know, Stephanie's a user. No, we didn't know that. Yeah, and that's why Stephanie and Ron, I think, are kind of friends, because I think they use together.
Well, thank you for your help.
Thank you.
Intent on tracking down Ron's cocaine dealers, Kenda pays Stephanie Richardson a visit at the home she shares with her girlfriend, Trisha Drew.
Steph, I need to ask you a few more questions. Mind stepping inside?
Sure.
Stephanie, I need you to tell me about you and Ron doing drugs.
I don't do drugs.
Oh, I don't know anything about drugs. Into denial, denial, denial.
I don't know if Ron does drugs, but I don't.
Steffi, this is a murder investigation. I don't care about the drugs.
What I care about is how it relates to why Ron is no longer with us. So let's start over again. Stephanie starts to cry a little bit. Well, I have bought drugs with him before, really. How shocking.
Stephanie admits that she and Ron used drugs together on multiple occasions in the past week. In fact, that's what they were doing the last time Stephanie ever saw him.
She says, look, I did drugs with him the night before he was killed.
Good, isn't it?
You ever mention any of the names of the people he was getting them from?
No, I've just driven him there.
Stephanie says she always stayed in the car when Ron made a purchase. She insists she never got a good look at his suppliers.
All right, thank you.
Stephanie is a dead end. Kenda needs to find someone who can give him a fresh perspective. And as luck would have it,
This is Kenda.
he gets a call from a new source, a woman named Julie Pahoviak, who claims to be Ron's girlfriend.
So let's go see what she has to say.
Hey.
Julie?
Yeah?
I'm Detective Kenda. This is Detective Ritz.
Hi, nice
Do you mind
to
if
meet
I
you.
come and talk to you?
Come on in.
Julie is very upset about his death, was very concerned about what might have happened to him. She described him as a nice guy. She liked him a lot. He was always nice to her.
We were dating.
Julie says that Ron had been staying with her the last 2 nights of his life, ever since Brian had borrowed his car.
Can you tell me how he found his car?
He didn't find his car. He was still really upset because he didn't know where it was.
He had no idea where it was. That's what he talked about. He still couldn't find it.
Ron was forced to rely on Julie for transportation, but Julie wasn't the only one lending him a helping hand.
His friend Stephanie was helping him out too.
Can you tell me the last time Stephanie was here?
Wednesday?
Which, as Kenda knows, was the night Ron Whitlow was killed.
Are you positive it was on Wednesday?
Yeah, it was Wednesday.
Julie's information contradicts the story Stephanie told Lieutenant Kenda just hours earlier.
Julie says Stephanie's with Ron the night he is murdered. What does Stephanie say? Stephanie says she didn't see him at all the night he's killed. And from 8 o'clock at night until 1 o'clock in the morning, she and all of her friends are helping the neighbors move.
What's going on?
Hey.
Well, my, you lying little...
Lt.Joe Kenda is investigating the gruesome murder of 30-year-old Ron Whitlow. At first, Kenda suspected that Ron's roommate, Brian Signor, shot him after stealing Ron's car. Until Brian's friends all vouched for his alibi.
All said that they were actually helping a friend of theirs, neighbors, move from one location to another location. And the timeline they gave us overlapped the murder timeline.
But after speaking with Ron's girlfriend, that alibi has been called into question. She claims that Ron's drug pal, Stephanie Richardson, picked him up at her house the night of the murder.
Oh, thanks again for the ride.
Oh, no problem.
When Stephanie and Brian were supposedly moving furniture.
Stephanie was part of the primary focus of our investigation at the time.
Detectives haul Stephanie back down to the station, where Kenda is waiting for her.
Whenever you're talking to an individual that you know is lying to you, then it's a process of ratcheting up the pressure. You want her to become distressed.
Stephanie, I don't like when people lie to me. In fact, it really pisses me off.
I haven't lied about anything.
At first, Stephanie denies the accusation.
This isn't a game. You said you didn't see Ron at all that night.
I didn't.
We have a witness that saw you pick him up at 8:45.
You could see in her demeanor where she became very withdrawn, scared, almost like building her own little wall to try to keep us out.
That's when Kenda goes in for the kill.
We tell her, Stephanie, we probably have enough to put a case together on just you. If you're not the person responsible for killing this guy, you better come across with who is.
Kenda is bluffing, but it's a bluff that elicits the desired effect.
She says, I will tell you the truth, but I want to talk to Trisha, my lover, first. Why does she want to talk to Trisha? Well, I don't know why, but I'd sure like to know.
I'll be back.
Within the hour, Kenda has located Trisha Drew.
Trisha looks emotional, but when she sees Stephanie, she almost starts to cry immediately because she can see how upset Stephanie is.
All right, here's the situation. No one's under arrest. You two are free to leave at any time.
You don't have to talk to us. You are free to go at any time. Do you understand that? You are freely willing to cooperate and tell us what you know about this death.
If you know something about what happened, I think it'd be best if you did talk to us and tell us.
I didn't want to be any part of this in the first place. Can we please just tell me?
Stephanie tells Trisha she had always known that sooner or later they'd get caught.
We say we'd like to interview you separately so that there's no confusion between who is saying what.
All right, Stephanie, have a seat. Detective Graham will be in. And Tricia, you come with me.
So we interview Stephanie in one interrogation room and Trisha in another.
Kenda has his detectives run the interviews so he can supervise both from an observation room.
When you reach that moment when you know that the truth is about to come, everything slows down, the room gets very quiet. This is the moment you've been waiting for.
So do you have something you want to tell me?
Stephanie says it all began 2 weeks ago when she was partying with Ron and his roommate Brian Signor at the apartment where they lived.
I would hang out with Ron. We did cocaine in his room, and Brian was there too.
Stephanie claims that at some point during her visit, Brian left to go see a girl he was dating, leaving Stephanie alone with Ron.
All right, man. I'm out of here.
You gone?
Got a chick to see. All right. See you, Stephanie.
See ya.
How you doing?
When he left, it was fine. I didn't think anything of it. But then he started coming on to me.
Doing good?
Oh, stop, please. Come on. No, please, really stop. Ron started raping me, and he did it at knife point.
She said that he raped me at knife point and gave me an STD. Well, there's a piece of news.
Kenda is floored by Stephanie's revelation. Instead of car theft, is it possible the motive for Ron Whitlow's murder is actually revenge?
He was sitting back in amazement and saying, wow, this is a lot more involved than we thought, wasn't it?
Lt.Joe Kenda is investigating the shooting death of 30-year-old Ron Whitlow. At first, Kenda suspected that Ron might have been murdered over an argument related to his stolen car. But he's just learned some shocking information from Stephanie Richardson.
She said that he raped me at knife point and gave me an STD. Well, there's a piece of news.
The next day felt horrible.
Stephanie said that she then felt compelled to tell Trisha what happened.
I tried to push him away and he wouldn't stop. He pulled out a knife and he forced himself on me. I couldn't make him stop.
What do you mean? Like, you're telling me that he raped you?
Oh my God, what?
She told Barbara, told Brian what had happened. And Trisha said we should call the police. But Barbara and Brian said, we're going to take care of this another way. What other way did you mean, Stephanie? We're gonna kill him. Wow.
From his observation room, Kenda listens as both Stephanie and Trisha explain how they met Barbara and Brian at a local bar, where they and their two friends strategically plotted to murder Ron Whitlow.
How would we even do something like that?
We've got his car. We know he wants it back.
They decide they're gonna go get it, and they're gonna drive it up to the old stage road. And Stephanie is gonna bring Ron up there, telling Ron that she has found his car. In reality, Brian Signor, Barbara Wilson, and Trisha Drew were going to be waiting at this location in ambush to kill Ron.
According to Stephanie, on the afternoon of May 27th, the group put their plan into action, all except Barbara, who backed out at the last second. Brian and Trisha picked up Ron's car from where Brian had been forced to abandon it.
They have the victim's car. They drive to the old stage road, they park the car, they get out and hide behind the rocks.
Meanwhile, Stephanie picked Ron up at his girlfriend Julie Pahoviak's house on the pretense that they were going to score some cocaine.
Thanks again for the ride.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, my guy's just like right up the road here, so
Oh.
won't take too long.
Well, actually, I was thinking I could take you to your car if you want to go ahead and get it.
She said Brian had been too scared to return it to Ron himself, so he'd told her instead.
I can take you and get it now if you want.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Stephanie pulls up with Ron, as expected. Ron is excited to see his car. And Brian immediately stands up.
When Ron saw Brian pointing a double-barreled shotgun at his chest, he threw his hands out in front of him in a hopeless attempt to shield himself.
What did I do?
Brian immediately shoots him with a shotgun. Ron turns and tries to run, and Brian shoots him again.
The second shot hit Ron in the leg from behind. Ron staggered, but made it to the side of the road. That's when Stephanie says she saw Trisha step forward with a pistol.
Brian yells at Trisha to shoot him. Stephanie says she sees Trisha pull up the gun and pull the trigger, but the gun doesn't go off.
Shooting!
It's jammed!
By this time, Ron had made it over the guardrail and down the embankment. Panicking, he crawled into the culvert. Brian ran down after him, while Trisha covered Ron's exit.
Stephanie sees Brian kneel down by the culvert and fire a third shot. She says that then they come back up out of the ravine, Trish and Brian, and they get in her truck.
It's a horrifying dual confession, and for Kenda, a stunning one.
For them to come out with that was an absolute shock to us. We know that Brian did not conspire alone to kill this individual, but 4 people did, 3 women and a man, to kill Ron, supposedly over a sexual assault.
It wasn't the kind of thing that was a spur of the moment. These are people who had really thought this out and really made their plans that they were going to take care of this guy.
Brian Signor is charged with first-degree murder. Barbara Wilson is charged with conspiracy to commit murder.
We ultimately charged Trisha and Stephanie with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit sin. They had resigned themselves to this. I think they resigned themselves to it before they ever made a statement. They couldn't live under the pressure. The pressure had to go away.
Barbara Wilson pleads guilty and is sentenced to 14 years. Trisha Drew and Stephanie Richardson also plead guilty and are both sentenced to 16 years. Brian Signar, the only one who didn't confess and was tried by a jury, is convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and accessory to murder. He is sentenced to 24 years. In the end, no one knows for certain if there is any truth to the rape allegations Stephanie Richardson made against Ron Whitlow.
We said to her, "You said he raped you at knife point, and this is the motivation for this crime." Yes. So, I gotta ask you, Stephanie, you're hanging out with this guy. You were with him on several occasions after he supposedly raped you at knife point. Why would you be around him alone if he had forced himself upon you? She couldn't explain it. Of course she couldn't.
To this day, Ron Whitlow's family believes the rape allegations are untrue.
There's no way. I mean, I know him. He's my brother. I honestly believe there was sex between Ron and Stephanie Richardson. I believe it was consensual, but the only answer she had for her lesbian lover was rape.
Questionable character.
The river didn't scream when it took her, rivers never do, but that morning in Flint it sounded like it was swallowing something heavy, something final, something that didn't want to go down. A slow, thick current under a low Michigan sky, ice still clinging to the banks like dirty lace, and the air with that metallic bite that tells you winter isn't finished with you yet. On the east side, behind the abandoned lot where the chain-link fence sagged like tired shoulders, a dog found what the water tried to hide. Not a body. Not bones. Just a shoe, small, black, scuffed at the toe, caught in reeds that shivered with every drag of the current. A child's shoe. A single piece of a person, the first punctuation mark in a sentence that would never end. The kind of detail that becomes a headline before the police even arrive. The river gives it back. The city holds its breath. And somewhere, in a house a few blocks away, a mother stared at an empty bed and realized the silence wasn't temporary anymore, it was permanent, expanding, filling every room like gas. Flint in 2003 was a city with its guard already up, a place that knew how to survive bad news. Factories had gone quiet, storefronts were boarded, and every streetlight felt like it could flicker out at any moment. People locked their doors without thinking. Kids grew up fast because the world demanded it. But even in a tough place, there are moments that punch through the armor. A missing person isn't just a case file, it's a rupture. It makes the neighbors watch the windows, it makes the pastors fill their sermons with warnings, it makes the corner store clerk stop joking for the first time in years. She was 17. Not a child, not quite an adult, living in that thin, dangerous space where people stop looking out for you as much as they used to. Her name was Tessa Hale, and she had a laugh that carried, friends said, like it didn't know how to be quiet. She liked cheap lip gloss that smelled like fruit. She kept a spiral notebook with song lyrics and half-finished lists of places she wanted to go, Chicago, New York, anywhere that felt like a movie. She was the kind of girl who could vanish in a crowd and still leave an imprint. On a Friday night at the start of March, she left her shift at a diner near Dort Highway, waved to the cook, zipped her thin jacket, and stepped outside into the kind of cold that makes your lungs tighten. She never made it home. It didn't happen with a thunderclap. It never does. First, it was just late. Her mom called her cell. It rang until voicemail. She called again. Straight to voicemail. She called Tessa's best friend, then another, then another. Nobody had seen her after the diner. They thought she'd gotten a ride. They thought she'd gone to her cousin's. They thought she'd met up with a boy. The usual assumptions, the ones that let you sleep for one more hour before the dread hardens. Midnight slid into 1 a.m., 1 into 2, and still nothing. By dawn, the mother was on the front porch, arms wrapped around herself, eyes scanning the street as if Tessa might just appear like a delayed bus. By mid-morning, the police were called, and the first response came with that tired shrug that families learn to hate. She's 17. She could have run off. Give it time. Teenagers do this. The words didn't land softly, they landed like stones. Because time is exactly what you can't afford when someone is missing. They put her photo on a copier at the station, grainy, slightly overexposed, Tessa smiling in a way that made her cheeks lift. Missing. Last seen, Friday night. Contact Flint PD. The flyers went up on telephone poles, on diner windows, on the bulletin board at church. A community that didn't have much gave what it could: eyes, feet, whispers. Her uncle drove the riverbanks in his pickup, headlights cutting through fog. Her aunt called hospitals, shelters, anywhere a girl could end up without wanting to be found. A volunteer search party assembled with flashlights and boots, the kind of people who show up because they can't stand the thought of doing nothing. And the river kept moving, brown and implacable, carrying debris, carrying secrets, carrying, maybe, her. The first real break didn't come from a detective's brilliance. It came from coincidence. A bus driver reported a girl matching Tessa's description near the old railroad spur the night she disappeared, standing alone under a street lamp that buzzed like an insect. Another witness, a man taking out trash behind a liquor store, claimed he heard an argument, a woman's voice sharp with fear, then the sound of a car door slamming. He couldn't describe the car. Dark, he said. Maybe a sedan. The kind of detail that fills pages but solves nothing. A third witness swore they saw Tessa get into a vehicle willingly, head bent toward the driver as if she recognized him. That detail hit the family like poison. If she got in willingly, who did she trust enough to climb in? That question started to crawl across Flint like a shadow, touching everyone. The diner staff. The regulars who lingered at the counter too long. The older guy who always asked for extra coffee refills. The customer who tipped too much. The teenage boy who waited outside sometimes, pretending not to. Names surfaced. Rumors fattened. A city already suspicious turned inward. Detectives canvassed the diner parking lot, found nothing but oil stains and cigarette butts. They pulled security footage from a gas station down the road, squinting at a flickering black and white image that showed a figure walking near the sidewalk at 10:47 p.m., too pixelated to confirm, too vague to trust. They pinged her phone records, last outgoing text at 10:12 p.m., a simple line, "You still up?" No reply recorded. The phone went silent after 10:19, as if someone had plucked its battery out with deliberate hands. They searched her room and found nothing that screamed runaway. No packed bag. No missing clothes. Her favorite hoodie still on the chair. Her notebook still on the desk, open to a page that read, in cramped handwriting, "Don't forget, pay Mom back." Not the words of someone trying to disappear. The detectives wrote it down anyway, because they write everything down, even when it makes them uneasy. Then came the shoe. Black, small, a cheap brand from a department store. The dog that found it belonged to a man who lived in a house that smelled like engine grease and old coffee. He wasn't looking for headlines. He was just walking his animal along the waterline because the dog liked the scent trails and the freedom. When the dog started barking and pawing at reeds, the man thought it was a dead raccoon. He pulled the reeds back and saw the shoe, waterlogged, half-buried, a pale sock still curled inside like a ghost of warmth. He didn't touch it at first. He just stared, because his brain recognized what his heart didn't want to. A shoe without a person is a warning. He backed away, called it in, and within an hour there were squad cars on the bank, tape flapping in the wind, officers with gloves and grim faces photographing something that looked too ordinary to be terrifying. The local paper ran it the next day, Riverbank find fuels fears in missing teen case. People bought the paper, folded it under their arms, whispered as they walked back to their cars. The talk on porches shifted from, "Maybe she'll come home," to, "What if she can't?" Search teams moved along the river in staggered lines, boots sinking into mud, eyes scanning for anything unnatural. The water was cold enough to burn. A diver went in near the bend where the current slowed, bubbles rising like sighs. Nothing. Another diver farther downstream, near the bridge where kids sometimes dared each other to jump in summer. Nothing. They used hooks, poles, sonar. They dragged and dragged, and the river gave them only trash, a tire, a shopping cart, an old coat bloated with water. The longer they searched, the louder the river seemed to get, as if mocking them with its constant motion. The mother stood on the bank with her hands clenched inside her sleeves, watching men disappear beneath the surface and re-emerge shaking their heads. Every time a diver surfaced, she tried not to hope, and failed anyway. Flint PD did what they could with what they had, and what they had wasn't much. The city was stretched thin. The detectives were tired, overworked, carrying caseloads that would make a larger department buckle. Still, they pulled in people for interviews. The diner manager. The cook. The waitress who'd seen Tessa last. A man who parked near the back every Friday, older, quiet, eyes that didn't blink much. A boy from Tessa's school who'd been seen walking her to the bus stop once. A neighbor who'd once yelled at Tessa for playing music too loud. They asked questions in the bright glare of the interrogation room. They listened to stories, watched body language, looked for cracks. Most of it was static. But in the static there was one thread that kept snagging: a car. Not just any car. A dark sedan with a dented rear bumper, seen more than once near the diner around closing time. Seen near the liquor store trash bins. Seen, according to one shaky witness, idling near the river access road around 11:30 p.m. The witness couldn't be sure about the license plate, only that it had a hanging ornament in the rearview mirror that swayed as the driver revved. It wasn't much. It was the kind of clue that collapses under pressure. But it was something. And in missing person cases, something is oxygen. The first suspect emerged the way suspects often do, through a whisper that became a rumor that hardened into, everyone knows. A man named Calvin Ma. 36. Worked odd jobs. Known around certain corners. Had been questioned years earlier in a separate incident, nothing stuck, nothing proven, but his name floated in the city's darker currents. Someone said they'd seen him near the diner. Someone said he'd talked to Tessa once, asking if she needed a ride. Someone said he had a dark sedan with a dented bumper. The police brought him in. He sat under the fluorescent lights with his hands folded, looking almost bored, the way people do when they've learned how to make themselves unreadable. He denied knowing Tessa. Denied being near the diner. Denied everything, as if denial were a shield. They asked about his car. He said he didn't own one. They checked. He didn't, at least not officially. The detectives pushed, and he pushed back with silence. No confession. No evidence. No arrest. The community took that and twisted it into whatever shape it needed. Some decided he was guilty. Some decided the cops were incompetent. Some decided the whole thing was hopeless and stopped talking about it out loud, which is how cold cases begin, when the noise dies. Weeks passed. Snow melted. Mud returned. The flyers faded in the rain, ink bleeding until Tessa's face looked like it was dissolving. Her mother kept one clean flyer on the refrigerator, taped at the corners like a fragile spell. The phone didn't ring with good news. It rang with wrong numbers, with prank calls, with silence on the line that made her stomach drop. Every time a body was found in the city, overdose, accident, violence, someone would call her, voice tense, saying, "Have you heard?" And she would say, "No," and hang up and wait for the next knock. The investigation slowed, not because they stopped caring, but because leads dried up and resources had to go elsewhere. The detectives shifted her case file from the top of the stack to somewhere in the middle, then to the bottom, but it never left the room. It sat there in a manila folder, a girl's name on the tab, the weight of unfinished business pressing down like a hand. And the river, always the river, kept sliding past the city, indifferent and endless, carrying spring runoff and summer storms, carrying reflections of streetlights at night like broken chains. People still drove over it every day without looking down. Kids still skipped stones in warm months. Fishermen still cast lines, pretending the water was only water. But in Flint, after 2003, the river had a new reputation, a new myth stitched into its current, that it could take a person and leave behind only scraps, like a predator that doesn't care about witnesses. The shoe was stored in an evidence bag and labeled and shelved, and sometimes, when the station was quiet, an officer would stare at it and feel that helpless anger rise, the kind that burns because it has nowhere to go. Years later, when people talk about that night, they still talk about the cold, the street lamp, the dented bumper, the shoe in the reeds. They talk about what they saw, what they thought they saw, what they wish they'd done differently. They talk about Tessa like she's paused somewhere just out of reach, 17 forever, caught in the moment between leaving work and arriving home. And the most brutal truth, the one that never makes the headlines but lives in every family who's waited, settles in like sediment, the city moved on because it had to, but the case didn't. It stayed alive in the cracks, in the quiet moments, in the way her mother still flinched at footsteps on the porch. Because an unsolved disappearance isn't an event. It's a condition. It infects time. It turns ordinary sounds into alarms. It turns a river into a suspect. And somewhere in Flint, in the same streets that once held her laughter, someone knows exactly what happened after 10:47 p.m., after the street lamp buzzed, after the car door slammed, and they've been living with that knowledge like a secret wrapped tight, waiting for it to surface, waiting for the current to finally give it back. The first time the detectives drove to Calvin Marr's address after that interview, the tires hissed on wet asphalt and the cruiser's heater breathed out air that smelled faintly of dust, like it hadn't been used enough to trust. The house sat back from the street with a porch light that never seemed fully on, just a weak amber glow leaking through a cracked fixture, and the yard looked like it had given up, patches of dead grass, a rusted grill on its side, a child's plastic tricycle half buried in weeds as if someone had tried to forget there were ever children there. The officer at the wheel killed the headlights and stared for a full second too long, because in every unsolved case there's a moment when you feel the universe daring you to be wrong. They'd been here before, on other calls, other names, other nights, and the rhythm was always the same: knock, question, denial, leave. But this time, the stakes weren't a broken window or a domestic argument. This time, they were staring at the possibility that a 17-year-old girl had been swallowed by the city and the river, and that the mouth that fed her to the water might be behind that door. They didn't have a warrant. They didn't have blood, hair, fibers, a confession. They had whispers, a dented bumper description that belonged to 1,000 sedans, and a mother's terror that was starting to calcify into rage. They did what cops do when the law draws lines and the street laughs at them: they watched. 2 officers in an unmarked car down the block, windshield fogging, coffee cooling, eyes pinned on the porch. Hours. Nothing. At dusk, a man came out, too far to see his face clearly, but his posture looked like someone who never expects good news. He took out a trash bag, dropped it into a bin, stood there a second, motionless. A cigarette ember flared in the dark. Then he went back inside. The street stayed silent, as if everyone else on the block had agreed to hold their breath with the police. Inside the station, the case file grew fatter, the pages multiplying like a disease. Tips came in, some sincere, some cruel, some delusional. A woman called claiming she saw Tessa at a bus terminal in Detroit. Another swore she was in Toledo. A third said she was being held in a basement by people who do that sort of thing, as if evil were a hobby. A man from a bar insisted he'd heard that Tessa owed money. Another said she'd been mixed up with someone dangerous. Every tip had to be logged, every name checked, every alley mentally walked. The detectives learned the hard way what missing person investigations really are: a fight against time, against noise, against human imagination. The city didn't give them truth, it gave them stories. And stories, too many stories, can drown a case just as surely as water. Tessa's mother, Lila, stopped sleeping in full nights. She slept in fragments, in 15-minute falls into exhaustion that ended with her jolting awake, convinced she'd heard the front door. She learned the sound of her own breath in the dark. She learned how grief shifts shape, how it doesn't always cry, it sometimes snarls. She sat at her kitchen table with a pen and wrote lists of places to call, lists of names to ask about, lists of things she wished she'd said the last time she saw Tessa alive. The notebook pages filled, then tore, then filled again. Her nails broke. Her hands trembled when she held a cup. And every time the phone rang, her heart rose like it was trying to escape her chest, because the ring itself became a kind of torture, possibility, then disappointment, then shame for having hoped. At the diner, the staff kept one of Tessa's photos taped near the register. Customers looked at it, some with sympathy, some with the quick discomfort of people who don't want tragedy to brush against them. The cook, an older man with scarred hands, started stepping outside at closing time and scanning the parking lot before locking up, as if he could undo the past by being careful now. The waitress who'd waved goodbye that night started checking her rearview mirror obsessively on the drive home. Small routines changed, and when routines change, you can feel fear seeping into the floorboards of a community. Flint didn't need another reason to be afraid, but it got one anyway. Weeks after the shoe, another item surfaced, quietly, almost insultingly small. A cheap silver charm bracelet found snagged on a branch downstream, discovered by a fisherman who thought it was a lure at first. The bracelet had little hearts and one tiny letter, T. It wasn't proof. It wasn't definitive. It was another punctuation mark. Another hard little fact that could sit in evidence and hum with menace. The police bagged it, photographed it, showed it to the family. Lila's hands shook so badly she had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. "That's hers," she said, and it wasn't a guess. It was certainty, the kind that makes your throat taste like pennies. Now the river wasn't just scenery. It was a timeline. A conveyor belt. If items were coming out, it meant something had gone in. The detectives brought in a specialist, an older investigator from a neighboring jurisdiction who'd worked drownings and recoveries for years. He walked the banks with them, boots sinking into mud, and pointed at the bends, the eddies, the places where the current slows and collects what it can't carry. "If she's in there," he said, voice low, "she could be anywhere by now. Or nowhere." That last word landed heavy. Nowhere. A person reduced to nowhere. The way water turns certainty into vapor. They requested another search. Resources were scarce, but the pressure was building. The local news ran segments with Lila on camera, eyes red, voice hoarse, begging anyone with information to come forward. The headlines sharpened. Missing teen, river clues deepen mystery. Flint mother pleads for answers. Community groups organized candlelight vigils, each flame a tiny rebellion against the dark, each prayer an attempt to wrest meaning out of chaos. But candles go out. Wind always wins. And after the cameras packed up, the city went back to its rhythms, leaving Lila in the echo. The second search was louder, more theatrical, with news vans lined along the access road, cables snaking in the dirt. Divers went in again, faces hidden behind masks, bodies disappearing under water that looked thick enough to chew. They searched near culverts, under the bridge, around the tangle of junk that humans had fed the river for decades. A tow truck dragged a rusted car frame from the water, mud pouring out of it like bloodless gore. People watched and whispered, as if the river was performing for them. The detectives stood with arms crossed, eyes narrowed, waiting for the moment that would either break the case open or crush what hope was left. Nothing broke. Nothing surfaced that could be called her, not in the way families need. By the end of the day, the divers were shivering, exhausted, and the news cameras started to drift toward other stories. The tow truck drove away with the empty car frame. The river swallowed the disturbance and smoothed itself out again, like it was resetting the scene. But the investigation didn't stop. It shifted, off the water, into the city's veins. Detectives traced Tessa's last hours with the precision of surgeons. They reconstructed her route. They talked to bus drivers, store clerks, anyone who might have seen a girl in a thin jacket walking under a buzzing street lamp. They canvassed houses. They knocked on doors until knuckles went numb. Some people answered. Some didn't. Some watched through curtains and pretended the world couldn't reach them. Fear has its own rules in a place like Flint. Sometimes it's safer to say nothing than to say what you know. Then, a lead arrived that didn't feel like a rumor. It felt deliberate. A man called from a payphone, voice distorted by distance and cheap plastic. He said he'd been near the liquor store that night. He said he'd seen a dark sedan, older model, maybe late 90s, pull behind the building. He said he'd seen a girl, arms pulled close to her body, hesitating. He said the driver got out and opened the passenger door like a gentleman. He said the girl looked back once, like she sensed something wrong. He said she didn't want to get in, and then he stopped, as if realizing what he'd just admitted. The detective asked his name. The caller went quiet. The only sound was the faint hiss of the line and something in the background, music maybe, or traffic, or the murmur of a bar. Then the line clicked dead. No trace. No callback. Just words hanging in the air like smoke. That was the first time the detectives started to consider a possibility that made their stomachs turn, that Tessa had been lured. Not snatched violently off the street by a stranger in a van, not taken in a chaotic moment of rage, but coaxed by someone who knew how to look harmless. Someone who could open a door and make it seem safe. Someone she might even recognize, enough to hesitate instead of run. They went back to the diner staff with new questions. Had anyone been watching her? Had anyone offered rides before? Did any regular customers drive a dark sedan? The waitress mentioned a man she'd noticed more than once, always alone, always paying with cash, always lingering after closing like he didn't want to go back to wherever he came from. She didn't know his name. She described him, mid-30s or older, short hair, heavy jacket, eyes that didn't match his smile. A detail surfaced, he wore a ring with a dark stone. Another staffer remembered him too. He asked about her schedule, the cook said, face hardening. Said he wanted to know when she worked again. I thought it was weird, but people ask stupid stuff all the time. In hindsight, every small thing becomes a siren. The detectives pulled old receipts, cash logs, anything that might tie a description to a real identity. They hit walls. Cash leaves no paper trail that matters. Flint had more shadows than streetlights, and a man who pays in cash can be a ghost by choice. They checked sex offender registries. They checked old case files. They checked anyone with a history of violence against women. The net widened, and what it caught was mostly empty water. Then came another name, not whispered this time, but offered by someone with a tremble in their voice. A young woman, 18, called from her aunt's house. She said she'd been approached weeks before Tessa disappeared by a man near the same diner. He offered her a ride. She declined. He smiled and didn't leave. He waited until her ride arrived, then drove off slowly, like he was memorizing the shape of her fear. She described his car, dark, older sedan, dented bumper. She remembered a hanging ornament in the rearview mirror, something that swung and caught light. Her description matched the earlier witness, close enough to make the detectives' pens move faster. They asked if she could identify him. She hesitated, then said she'd only seen him in profile, that she didn't want to get involved, that she had younger siblings. Her voice broke when she said, "I'm scared." The detectives were used to fear, but it never got easier. Fear is what keeps predators alive. It's what turns neighborhoods into locked boxes. They asked her to come in anyway. She did, eyes darting, shoulders tense. They showed her photo arrays. Faces blurred together, men with similar haircuts, similar cold eyes. She pointed at one, then pulled her finger back like the paper had burned her. "Maybe," she said. "I don't know." The detective noted the number of the photo she'd hovered over. It belonged to a man named Owen Rask. 39. A mechanic. Minor priors, DUI, assault in a bar fight years earlier, nothing that screamed serial predator on paper. But paper is polite. Paper doesn't show what people do in the dark. They brought Rask in. He sat with grease under his fingernails, hands clasped, jaw tight. He claimed he'd never been to the diner. He claimed he didn't know Tessa. He claimed he'd been home that night. When they asked about his car, his eyes flickered, tiny, involuntary. He said he drove a dark sedan, yes. Older model, yes. He said the bumper dent was from a fender bender, nothing more. He said he had an ornament hanging from the rearview mirror, a little plastic fish, a joke gift from someone years ago. The detective's pulse kicked. He asked if they could see the car. Rask shrugged. "It's at my place," he said, too casual. The detectives didn't have a warrant. They asked for consent. Rask refused, smile thin. "Get your paperwork," he said. Paperwork takes time. Time is what killers use. They applied for a warrant based on witness statements, the matching car description, the pattern of approach. A judge read it, frowned, and asked for more. Not enough, the judge said. Not probable cause, not yet. The detectives left with their anger carefully folded away, because you can't arrest someone for making your stomach knot. They went back to the streets and tried to build more, anything more. They started to watch Rask. They parked near his garage. They noted his comings and goings. They waited for mistakes. Weeks turned into months. Spring became summer. The river changed color, warmed, smelled different, like algae and heat. Kids played near it again, as if the city was trying to heal by pretending nothing bad could live in the water. Lila kept showing up at the station, eyes hollowed, voice sharp. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "What are you doing right now?" The detectives had no answer that would satisfy a mother whose daughter had become a question mark. They told her they were working leads. They told her they hadn't forgotten. And she looked at them like they were lying, because grief teaches you that promises are cheap. One night in late July, a patrol officer pulled over a dark sedan for a broken taillight. The driver's license read Owen Rask. The officer noted the dented bumper. Noted the plastic fish ornament swinging in the rearview mirror. Noted the smell of stale cigarettes and something else, sweet, chemical, like cleaning solvent. The officer ran his name, saw the note in the system, person of interest in the Hale disappearance. He called it in. Backup arrived. They asked Rask if they could search the vehicle. He refused. They asked again. He refused again, voice calm, eyes flat. They couldn't force it. All they could do was write a citation and let him drive away into the dark, taillight blinking like a taunt. In the station, the detective who'd been working Tessa's file slammed his fist on his desk hard enough to rattle pens. The sound echoed down the hallway, a sharp, helpless crack. Because the case had become something monstrous, a shape you could see but couldn't touch. A man you could look at but couldn't grab. A river that whispered but wouldn't speak. And somewhere in that tangle, Tessa's life had been reduced to objects, shoe, bracelet, a handful of witness lines, while the city kept breathing, kept eating days, kept moving forward as if forward meant anything when the past was still bleeding. Late that same week, Lila got an envelope in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, printed cheaply, slightly blurred. It showed the river at night, the water a black smear under a weak street lamp glow. In the lower corner, barely visible, was something pale near the bank, too vague to identify, too deliberate to ignore. No note. No words. Just an image that felt like a finger pressed against a wound. Lila's hands shook as she stared at it, and in that moment, the case stopped being just a disappearance. It became a message. A game. Someone out there wanted her to look at the river and feel that helplessness spike again. Someone wanted the city to remember. Someone wanted control. And control, in a cold case, is the most terrifying clue of all. The photograph didn't look like much under the kitchen light, just grainy darkness, a strip of water, a street lamp's sickly halo, but Lila Hale stared at it the way people stare at a stain they can't scrub out, because once you see it, you start imagining what's underneath. The paper smelled like cheap ink in someone else's hands. She held it at arm's length, then closer still, until the lamp glare washed it out and her eyes burned. The river at night. That same stretch. That same bend. A pale blur near the bank that could be driftwood, foam, a plastic bag, or something you didn't want to name. No message. No signature. No mercy. Just a reminder, delivered like a slap through the mailbox slot. The kind of thing that makes your skin crawl because it means someone went there, stood in the dark, framed the shot, pressed the shutter, printed it, and walked right up to her house. Not a random prowler. Someone who knew exactly where to put the knife. She drove to the station with the photo clutched in both hands like it might fly away, knuckles white, jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. She didn't call first. She didn't ask permission. She stormed through the lobby and demanded a detective the way a drowning person demands air. The desk sergeant tried to slow her down, tried to soften it with procedure, and she looked at him like procedure was a luxury for people whose children weren't missing. When Detective Soto finally stepped out, tie loosened, eyes rimmed red from too many nights, he took one look at Lila's face and knew this wasn't another flyer run or another dead-end tip. He led her into an interview room and shut the door, and the room swallowed the sound of the outside world like a coffin. She slid the photograph across the table. Soto picked it up carefully, like it might be contaminated with intent, and stared. For a long moment he said nothing. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent light overhead and the soft rasp of Lila's breath, too sharp, too fast. He turned the photo over. Blank. He held it to the light, looked for impressions, for indentations, for any sign of writing that had been torn away. Nothing. He asked her who had access to her mailbox key. Nobody, she snapped. He asked if she'd noticed anyone watching the house. She laughed, one short, bitter bark. Everyone watches, she said. All the time. It's Flint. Her eyes didn't blink. So what is it? She demanded. A sick joke? A confession? A threat? Soto put the photo down and made a choice he didn't want to make, the kind cops make when they are forced to admit the thing everyone is thinking but nobody wants to say out loud. It's contact, he said. It's someone inserting themselves. Or it's someone who's already been there, staying close enough to hurt you from a distance. The photograph went into an evidence sleeve. They dusted it for prints. They swabbed it for DNA. They ran it through what databases they had access to. They found nothing usable, nothing clean enough to stand in court. Either the sender wore gloves, or the print quality was too poor, or the paper had been handled too many times. The case swallowed the photo the way the river swallowed everything else, no answers, only new questions. But it changed the investigation's temperature. It turned the disappearance from a passive void into an active wound. Someone, somewhere, wanted a reaction. And they'd gotten one. Soto called a meeting the same day, pulled in the handful of detectives who still had the stamina to keep chasing ghosts. The whiteboard filled with names and arrows and question marks: Calvin Marr, Owen Rask, unknown sedan, payphone caller, bracelet, shoe, River Bend. The photograph sat in the center like an accusation. They argued about what it meant. One detective said it could be a prank, some idiot feeding off tragedy. Another said it felt too specific, too intimate. A third said the timing mattered, arriving after the traffic stop with Rask, after the surveillance, after the case had threatened to sharpen around him. Soto didn't speak much. He listened, eyes narrowed, hands flat on the table. He watched the room the way you watch a storm line building on the horizon. Because storms don't announce themselves. They just arrive. They made a plan that night, and it wasn't elegant. It wasn't the kind of plan that ends in handcuffs and headlines. It was the kind of plan you make when you're losing: put eyes on Lila's house, put plainclothes near the mailbox route, set up a camera if you can afford one, watch for anyone who lingers, anyone who circles, anyone who thinks they're invisible. The department didn't have the budget for fancy equipment. They had one aging camera with a fuzzy night mode and a tripod that didn't lock right. They set it anyway, angled toward the porch, toward the mailbox, toward the street that ran like a vein past Lila's front yard. The idea was simple: if the sender returned, they'd catch a silhouette. A license plate. A movement. Something. Anything. It felt thin. It felt fragile. But thin is still a net, and sometimes nets catch. Lila went home that night and found her house changed, not physically, but spiritually, like it had been marked. Every creak sounded deliberate. Every headlight sweep across the curtains felt like a spotlight. She checked the locks twice, then again, then again. She kept the porch light on until dawn. She sat in the living room with the TV off, listening to the refrigerator click and the furnace breathe, waiting for a sound that didn't belong. When she finally slept, she dreamed of water, black water, and woke up with her throat tight and her heart sprinting. The next morning, the camera caught nothing but the neighborhood's usual ghosts: stray cats, raccoon, a drunk stumbling past at 2:13 a.m. with his hands up like he was surrendering to the night. No sender. No shadow. But the attempt, even failing, put pressure on the city. The rumor mill spun again. People heard the mother got a photo. People heard the cops were watching the house. People heard the case was heating up. And when cases heat up, someone always panics. 2 days later, the auto shop where Owen Rask worked received an anonymous call. The caller didn't ask for Rask. The caller didn't threaten anyone. The caller simply said, "Tell him to stop," and hung up. The mechanic who answered thought it was a joke until he realized his hands were shaking. He reported it to police because fear is contagious, and nobody wants to be the one who ignored the warning sign in hindsight. Soto's team logged it, circled Rask's name harder, and quietly doubled surveillance. 2 unmarked cars now, rotating shifts, watching his apartment, watching his routes, watching the way he moved through the city like a man who believed he owned it. Rask didn't do anything dramatic at first. He went to work. He bought groceries. He smoked outside his building at night with his shoulders hunched against the cold like any other man. But the detectives noticed small things, micro-movements that didn't belong to innocence. He checked his mirrors too often. He took an extra turn around the block before parking. He stepped out of his garage and scanned the street longer than necessary, as if counting exits. And then, one evening, he didn't go home at all. He drove past his apartment, kept going, out toward the industrial edge of town where streetlights were sparse and the air smelled like wet metal. The unmarked car followed at a distance, headlights dimmed, heartbeat rising. Rask turned down a side road that ran along an old drainage channel feeding toward the river. He parked beneath a dead billboard and shut off his lights. The detective stopped farther back, engine idling low, watching his dark shape through the windshield. Rask got out and stood there, motionless, as if listening. He walked toward the channel. He leaned over the rail. For a second, it looked like he might throw something. A bag. A bundle. But his hands were empty. He just stared down into the black, and the longer he stared, the more it felt like a ritual. Like the place mattered to him. Like he was visiting a grave that hadn't been found. Soto wasn't in the car that night. 2 younger detectives were, and youth can be a problem because impatience sounds like courage. One of them wanted to approach, to confront, to force the moment. The other held him back, whispering the hard truth, no warrant, no probable cause, no evidence. If they spooked him, they'd lose what little trail they had. So they stayed put, watching a man stand over darkness like he was checking on a secret. Rask went back to his car after 7 minutes. 7 minutes exactly. He drove away, normal speed, no erratic turns, as if he'd just taken a smoke break. The detectives followed him home, wrote it down, filed it, felt their frustration boil. Because in their bones, they knew they'd just watched something important. And in their hands, they held nothing you could arrest a man for. The following week brought a different kind of lead, quiet, trembling, dangerous. A teenager from Tessa's neighborhood showed up at the station late at night with a hoodie pulled tight over his head, eyes darting as if the walls themselves might repeat what he said. His name was Marcus, 16, and he smelled like sweat and cheap cologne and panic. He told the desk sergeant he needed to talk to someone about the Hale girl. He said it fast, like if he slowed down he'd lose nerve. They brought him to Soto, and when the door shut and the room sealed, Marcus started shaking. He said he'd been near the river on the night Tessa disappeared. Not at the bend where they searched, but farther up, near the drainage channel that fed into the main flow. He said he'd been smoking with friends, hiding from parents, doing what kids do when the world feels too heavy to face sober. He said he'd seen a dark sedan pull up. He said he'd seen a man get out, tall, heavy jacket, posture stiff. He said he'd seen someone else in the passenger seat, slumped low. He said he'd heard a muffled sound, maybe a cry, maybe a cough, maybe a pleading word lost under the wind. He said his friends told him to shut up and keep moving because it's none of our business. He said he listened, because in Flint you learn early that curiosity can get you hurt. But the image never left him. It burned behind his eyes. When he saw Tessa's flyers the next day, he knew the shape in the passenger seat might have been her. Might. The word tasted like rot. Soto leaned forward and asked Marcus why he waited weeks to come in. Marcus swallowed hard and said, because I saw the photo on the news. The one her mom got. That means somebody's playing. That means they're close. He lowered his voice to a whisper. And I heard people say if you talk, you end up in the river too. The statement lit the room like a match. Not just because it was a new witness, but because of the location. A drainage channel feeding toward the river. A place Rask had visited under the billboard. The same geography. The same dark arteries. Soto asked for details. Marcus described the car's shape, the dented bumper, the way the street lamp reflected off a hanging ornament. He didn't get the plate. He didn't see the man's face clearly. He didn't see what happened next. He saw enough to fear it, not enough to prove it. And that's how evil survives, through partial sight. Soto offered Marcus protection. Marcus laughed, bitter and short. Protection, he said. From who? Y'all can't even protect her. The words hit like a slap, not because they were unfair, but because they were true. Still, Marcus signed a statement with hands that trembled so badly the pen scratched paper like a knife. He left the station and disappeared back into the city's shadows, and Soto felt the familiar dread. Now that the kid had spoken, was he safe? Or had they just painted a target on his back? The detectives tried again for a warrant on Rask's vehicle, adding Marcus's statement, the pattern of approach, the traffic stop details, the anonymous, tell him to stop, call, the late-night trip to the drainage channel. They presented it to a different judge this time, an older man with tired eyes who'd seen enough to know the difference between hunches and facts. He read it slowly, tapping a pen against the desk in a rhythm that sounded like a clock counting down. He asked questions. He pushed back. He demanded specifics, dates, times, corroboration. Soto answered as best he could, feeling the case wobble on a thin edge. The judge finally sighed, rubbed his forehead, and granted a limited warrant, search the vehicle, seize anything relevant, but no forced entry into the home without additional cause. It wasn't everything they wanted, but it was a door cracking open. They moved fast, because doors close. 2 units boxed Rask's sedan in the auto shop parking lot just before closing time. Rask came out wiping his hands on a rag, saw the cruisers, and his face did something subtle, an almost invisible tightening around the eyes. He asked what this was about. Soto handed him the warrant. Rask read it, expression flat, then looked up with a smile that didn't reach anywhere human. Finally, he said, like he'd been waiting. They searched the car under harsh lot lights that made every shadow look guilty. They lifted floor mats. They checked the trunk. They swabbed door handles, seat belts, the seams where skin cells hide. They found cigarette butts. Fast food wrappers. A tire iron. A length of cord that could have been for hauling equipment, or tying something down, or something worse. They bagged it all, because in a case like this, everything could be a weapon. They found a small plastic fish ornament hanging from the rearview mirror, swinging gently as if amused by the attention. They found a faint chemical smell in the trunk, cleaner, solvent, something meant to erase. They sprayed luminol. Under the blue glow, nothing lit up like a confession. No bright splash. No obvious stain. The trunk stayed stubbornly dark. But then, in the crevice beneath the rear seat, hidden deep, where most people never look, they found a single long hair, caught like it had been waiting years to be discovered. Dark brown. Fine. Almost invisible. They sealed it in an evidence envelope like it was gold. Because in 2003, DNA wasn't magic yet for every department. It was expensive. It was slow. But it was real. And real was what they'd been starving for. Rask watched the whole search with his hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed, like a man watching someone wash a car. When they finished, he leaned close enough for Soto to smell grease and cigarette smoke. "You're wasting your time," he murmured. Not loud. Not for the others. Just for the detective, just for the private slice of fear he wanted to plant. Then he stepped back and walked away, leaving Soto holding an evidence bag and a rage that had nowhere to go. The hair went to the lab, tagged, processed, compared against what little reference they had from Tessa's belongings. Days passed. Then weeks. The lab backlog was brutal. The waiting became its own kind of violence, every hour a stretch of darkness. Lila called daily. Soto started dreading the phone, not because he didn't want to speak to her, but because every call forced him to feel the weight of what he couldn't deliver. "Did you find her?" she asked, every time. And every time he had to say no. Then, on a grey morning when the sky looked like wet cement, the lab report came back. Partial profile. Not enough to confirm. Not enough to exclude. Inconclusive. A word that should be illegal in cases like this. Soto stared at it until the letters blurred. Inconclusive meant the hair could be hers, could be anyone's. Inconclusive meant the case stayed in the same place, close enough to smell answers, too far to touch them. And yet, something shifted. Because once a case stops being only absence and starts being evidence, even inconclusive evidence, it becomes harder to ignore. It becomes heavier. It becomes a thing that can drag a suspect down if the right piece clicks into place later. The detectives didn't know it then, but that hair would become a time bomb. Not today. Not this year. But someday, when science sharpened and databases grew and the city's old secrets started to surface like debris after a storm, that tiny strand might finally choose a side. For now, Flint kept living with the unfinished sentence. The river kept running. The mother kept waiting. The suspect kept smiling like he knew something the rest of them didn't. And the case, revived, restless, hung in the air over the city like a low cloud that refused to break, thick with the promise of rain. In Flint, inconclusive doesn't sound like a lab result, it sounds like a door slamming in your face while you're still reaching for the handle. And when Soto read the report again, partial profile, insufficient comparison, cannot confirm, cannot exclude, he felt something inside him go cold and brittle, because a case like this feeds on gaps, it grows teeth in the spaces where certainty should be, and the only thing worse than having no evidence is having evidence that refuses to speak clearly. He folded the paper and tucked it into the file anyway, because that's what you do when you're fighting a thing that doesn't want to be solved. You document every breath, every footprint, every microscopic thread, hoping the future will be kinder than the present. Outside the station, winter tried to return in the mornings, thin frost on windshields, the kind of chill that makes the world feel sharp-edged, and the city kept moving like nothing was wrong, like no mother was waking up every day to an empty room. But the case was no longer just a missing girl. It had turned into a pressure point. And pressure points make people flinch. Rask didn't flinch on the surface. He kept working, kept buying cigarettes, kept letting his plastic fish sway in his rearview mirror like a joke only he understood. But the surveillance team started noticing something else, other vehicles, lingering too long on his street, a dark SUV that parked near his building and left when the unmarked car moved, a man on foot who walked past twice in 1 hour, eyes forward, pace too steady. It wasn't proof of anything, but it felt like the air around Rask was getting crowded, like he wasn't alone in his orbit. Predators rarely hunt without a network, not always accomplices, sometimes just people who look away for the right reasons. The detectives ran plates when they could. The SUVs came back registered to shell addresses, leased, unhelpful. Flint was full of ghosts on paper. Still, Soto wrote it down, because patterns are how you catch what slips through your fingers. Then Marcus stopped answering his phone. At first it was normal, teenagers disappear into their own lives all the time, but 2 days went by, then 3, and the silence began to feel heavy. Soto drove past the address Marcus had given, a tired duplex with peeling paint and a yard littered with toys that hadn't been played with in years. No lights. No movement. The neighbor, an older woman with a robe and wary eyes, cracked her door open just enough to show her face. When Soto asked about Marcus, she hesitated the way people hesitate when they're deciding whether truth is worth the trouble. "Haven't seen him," she muttered, and started to close the door. Soto stopped it with his palm, not aggressively, just firmly, asked again, softer. The woman's lips tightened. "His arm took him somewhere," she said, voice low. said it wasn't safe. Soto asked why. The woman's eyes flicked past him, down the street, like the street itself might be listening. You know why, she said, and shut the door. That night, a patrol unit was dispatched to a report of shots fired near the railroad spur. No one was hit. No one saw anything. The shell casings were collected, photographed, bagged, and filed under a different incident report. But in Soto's mind, the cases started to overlap, because fear doesn't compartmentalize. In a city like Flint, violence is a language. Sometimes it's a message. Sometimes it's punctuation. And when a key witness vanishes into somewhere safe, at the same moment gunfire cracks the air near the place he said he'd seen the sedan, the universe stops looking like coincidence. Lila felt it too, even without the details. Mother's sense shifts in the atmosphere like animals sense storms. She came to the station again, not with pleading this time, but with fury that had sharpened into something dangerous. Her eyes looked like they'd been sanded raw. She demanded to know why Rask was still walking free. She demanded to know why a case with a suspect and evidence and witnesses still couldn't produce an arrest. Soto tried to explain warrants, thresholds, what courts need, what juries believe. The words sounded weak even to him. Lila slapped the file folder on his desk hard enough to make the paper inside jump. My daughter isn't thresholds, she hissed. She's not probable cause. She's a person. She's missing. And someone out there is playing games. Her voice broke on the last word, because even rage can't hold the weight forever. Soto didn't argue. He couldn't. Instead, he asked Lila to walk him through the day the photograph arrived again, minute by minute. Sometimes the detail you dismissed the first time, the dog barking at the wrong hour, a car slowing at the corner, becomes the crack you need. Lila stared at the ceiling, jaw working, and said she remembered a sound the night before, a car idling outside for longer than it should have, then rolling away. She'd told herself it was nothing. She remembered a man across the street pretending to check his mail when she went out, his gaze sliding toward her porch. She described him, baseball cap, bulky jacket, posture like a bouncer. She'd never seen him before. Soto asked if she could pick him out of a lineup. Lila shook her head. He kept his face down, she said. Like he knew how not to be remembered. The phrase lingered in the room. Knew how not to be remembered. Like a habit. Like training. That same week, a different tip came in from a place nobody expected, the landfill office. A sanitation worker reported finding a small plastic bag inside a torn trash sack that had spilled on the sorting line. Inside the bag was a driver's license, expired, belonging to a young woman named Tessa Hale. The photo was her. The name was hers. The address was Lila's. The ID had been snapped cleanly in half, as if someone had broken it with careful hands. The worker thought it was just someone cleaning out old junk until he recognized the name from the missing flyers still posted around town. He called it in. The ID went into evidence, and the case inhaled again, sharp and hungry. The landfill discovery was both hope and horror. Hope, because it was another tangible item, another piece of her life that had been handled by someone after she vanished. Horror, because it meant someone had made a decision, keep the ID, break it, throw it away like garbage. That's not the act of someone trying to help. That's disposal. That's control. That's the hand of someone who thinks they can decide what matters. Soto traced the trash route associated with the landfill batch. It wasn't perfect, garbage is mixed, routes overlap, bins get emptied into larger trucks, but they narrowed it to a cluster of neighborhoods near the east side, the same area where the diner sat, the same arteries feeding toward the river. They checked schedules, truck logs, the kind of mundane paperwork that can unexpectedly become a map to a crime. A supervisor remembered an unusually heavy load from a particular block 2 days before the ID was found. They pulled the address list. One street jumped out because it sat 2 blocks from Rask's garage. It wasn't proof. But it was gravity. They canvassed again, and canvassing in a cold case is like knocking on doors in a cemetery, people answer with ghosts. Some had moved. Some had died. Some had learned to stop opening doors for police. But one man, a retiree with tired eyes, mentioned something that made Soto's skin prickle, a dark sedan that used to park near an abandoned house on the corner late at night back in 2003, headlights off, engine running. I thought it was drug deals, the man said. You didn't call the cops for that back then unless you wanted trouble. He described a hanging ornament, a fish, maybe, swaying. That car again, Soto murmured, more to himself than to the man. That abandoned house still stood, boarded up, windows like dead eyes. The city had forgotten it, but the neighborhood hadn't. Soto requested a search warrant for the property on the grounds of potential evidence disposal related to an ongoing missing person investigation. A judge, less skeptical now that the case had produced physical items, signed it with a grim expression. The team entered the house wearing masks, flashlights cutting through stale dust. The air inside was thick, old, damp. There were beer cans, needles, burned spoons, signs of squatters. But deeper in the basement, they found something stranger, a patch of concrete that looked newer than the rest, a rough rectangle poured over older floor like a bandage. Fresh concrete in an abandoned house is never a good sign. Never. The forensic techs went quiet as they knelt, tapping the slab, listening to the hollow differences. They sprayed luminol along the edges. Faint traces lit up in places, not a dramatic bloom, but enough to make the room feel smaller. They drilled a core sample. The drill whined through concrete like an animal in pain. Dust rose in a cloud. Beneath the slab, the soil looked disturbed, dark, loose, wrong. A detective's voice tightened. Bag everything, he said. Photograph everything. The feeling in the basement shifted from investigation to excavation. They dug carefully, because you don't want to destroy what you're trying to recover, and because every shovel of dirt is also a shovel into someone's nightmare. The soil smelled like mildew and rot. They found fragments first, not bones, not yet, just fabric, stained, tangled in roots. A strip of denim. A metal zipper. Then a button. Then a clump of hair matted with dirt. The room went silent except for breathing, because silence is what happens when reality finally presses its face against the glass. They didn't find a body. Not fully. Not in a way that would let a mother say goodbye. What they found were remnants that suggested something had been there, something human, something removed. The ground beneath the slab had been used, then emptied, then sealed. Someone had buried something long enough for traces to soak into soil, then come back later with tools, dug it up, and erased the hole with concrete, as if trying to outrun time. That kind of effort isn't casual. That kind of effort is obsession. It's a person who thinks ahead. It's a person who wants to control the narrative even years later. Word got out anyway, because word always gets out. The news ran it with that hungry tone that turns grief into spectacle, abandoned house search in missing teen case. Concrete slab raises questions. The community buzzed. People sat on porches and speculated. Some swore they'd always known that house was bad. Others insisted the cops were fishing. Lila watched the segment on TV with her hands trembling so hard she couldn't hold a glass. When she heard fabric and hair, she made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a scream, something rawer than both, the sound of a person trying not to fall apart because if she falls apart, there's nothing left to keep her standing. Soto didn't tell her everything at first. He waited for lab confirmation. He waited for something he could say without crushing her with uncertainty. But Lila came to him, eyes blazing, and demanded the truth like she'd demanded it from the river. So he told her carefully, in words that tried to be gentle and failed. He told her they'd found items consistent with burial. He told her they'd found trace evidence. He told her they were testing. Lila stared at him and then whispered, so he went back. The pronoun hit the air like a gunshot. He? Not maybe. Not someone. He? She already had a villain in her mind, and the case was slowly starting to shape itself around that same silhouette. The lab work that followed was slow, methodical, brutal. Soil samples. Hair samples. Fabric analysis. They compared fibers to clothing from Tessa's room. They compared the hair to her brush. And once again, the results played that cruel game, partial matches, possible associations, not definitive enough to stand alone in court. The case kept offering Soto the same kind of evidence, near misses. Shadows. Edges. But now, the edges were adding up. The abandoned house's location. The car sightings. The fish ornament. The anonymous calls. The photograph. The snapped ID at the landfill. The late-night ritual at the drainage channel. It was all pointing, not like a clean arrow, but like a dozen shaky fingers all trembling toward the same direction. Soto pushed for a deeper look into Rask's life, bank records, phone logs, associates, anyone who might have helped him move something heavy, pour concrete, keep quiet. He found a purchase on a hardware store receipt from early March 2003, quick-set concrete mix, shovel, heavy-duty gloves, contractor bags. Not illegal purchases. Not rare. But the date was close enough to make Soto's stomach knot. He tracked the store clerk who had been on shift back then, now working in another town, older, grayer, memory blurred by years. The clerk couldn't remember Rask's face. But he remembered the transaction because it was late, because the buyer paid cash, because the buyer made a joke about fixing a mess. The joke wasn't funny now. The joke tasted like dirt. Soto tried one more time to get a warrant for Rask's apartment, arguing that the accumulation of evidence, items connected to Tessa, witness statements, suspicious purchases, now met the threshold. The judge granted it, but narrowly, with conditions, with limits, like the law was still hesitant to leap. The team planned a search for dawn, because dawn is when people are most vulnerable, when sleep makes liars slow. They rolled out in quiet formation, radios low, boots hitting pavement in a rhythm that sounded like inevitability. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again, harder. Still nothing. A neighbor cracked her door, eyes wide. He left last night, she whispered, before anyone asked. Packed his car. Drove off. Soto felt his pulse jump. Where? He snapped. The neighbor shook her head. Didn't say. Just left. The warrant suddenly felt like a dead piece of paper. They entered the apartment anyway. The air inside smelled clean, too clean, like someone had scrubbed their life down to the studs. The closets were empty. The drawers were bare. The trash can had a fresh liner. It looked like a staged absence, a vanishing act rehearsed. But on the kitchen counter, beneath a neatly folded dish towel, they found one thing left behind as if on purpose, a single printed photograph, face down. Soto lifted it carefully, and when he turned it over, his throat tightened. It was the river again. Same angle. Same bend. Same sickly halo from a street lamp. But this time, there was writing on the back, block letters pressed hard enough to bruise the paper, you keep looking. You'll find what you deserve. And in that moment, the case stopped being a cold case with a revived pulse. It became a chase. A direct confrontation. The city had been holding its breath for years, and now something out there had decided to inhale, to speak, to threaten, because being watched had finally started to feel dangerous to the person doing the hiding. The note sat on the evidence table like it had weight, like ink could press down on steel, and Soto read the sentence again and again until the words stopped being language and became a sound, low, threatening, intimate, because the most terrifying part wasn't the threat itself, it was the certainty behind it, the calm assumption that the writer still had control. You keep looking. You'll find what you deserve. Not stop looking. Not leave it alone. A promise instead, like the search was a trap and the trap had teeth. The apartment around them was stripped bare, the kind of clean that never happens by accident, drawers wiped, closets emptied, toothbrush gone, but the note remained like a fingerprint made of spite, and that felt deliberate, theatrical, designed to set a hook in the investigators' minds the same way the first photo had set a hook in Lila's heart. Outside, dawn had a weak, grey light, the kind that makes everything look drained of color, and the unmarked units fanned out through the neighborhood like the last pieces of a net that's already tearing. Dispatch ran it out, Owen Rask, missing person of interest, last known address vacated, vehicle possibly dark sedan, older model, dented rear bumper, plastic fish ornament. A bolo went across Genesee County. Patrol cars started to prowl the streets with that subtle shift in posture that tells a city something is happening, officers sitting straighter, radios clipped closer to mouths, eyes scanning mirrors. And still, 4 hours, nothing. He was gone the way smoke is gone, no direction, no trail, just absence. Soto drove straight from the emptied apartment to the river access road, because the note had forced his mind into a shape it didn't want. If you keep looking, you'll find what you deserve. The river was the center of the story. The river was the threat stage. And if Rask wanted them to find something, he picked the place that had already swallowed the case once. The morning air by the water smelled like mud and old leaves and that faint chemical tang that sometimes hangs over industrial towns, and the river itself moved slow and thick, brown under a sky the color of bruised steel. Soto stepped out of his car and listened. No birds. No traffic close enough to matter. Just water, sliding past, indifferent and endless, like time itself. He walked the bank where the shoe had been found years earlier, boots crunching on frozen grit. He stared into reeds that rattled in the wind. He looked for anything out of place, fresh tire marks, broken branches, disturbed mud, a scrap of paper. But the riverbank had been trampled by search teams and media crews and curious locals for months back in 2003. It was a place where footprints overlapped and erased each other. Still, Soto couldn't shake the idea that the message on the photograph wasn't just rage. It was direction. A predator doesn't tell you to keep hunting unless he thinks hunting will hurt you. Unless he thinks he can control what you find. Back at the station, the case room had changed. It was no longer a file buried under other files, it was a living thing on the wall, pinned up with maps, photos, timelines, arrows connecting nights to objects to names. They circled Rask's known associates, co-workers at the shop, a cousin in Saginaw, an ex-girlfriend with a restraining order from years ago, a friend who ran a small towing business. They pulled his phone records and found what you expect from someone who knows how to disappear, gaps. A prepaid phone purchased weeks earlier, activated, used briefly, then dead. Calls to no one in his registered contacts. Calls to payphones. Calls to numbers that belonged to burner lines that led nowhere. The more they dug, the more they saw a man who'd been preparing, not reacting, someone who'd lived like he always expected to run. Lila, meanwhile, learned about the note the way families always learn things, too late, through a leak, through a neighbor who saw the news, through the cruel efficiency of gossip. She showed up at the station by noon, eyes blazing like she'd been awake for days, hair pulled back so hard it looked painful. She didn't wait at the front desk. She marched down the hall as if the building belonged to her now, as if grief had given her authority. When Soto stepped out to meet her, she shoved herself close enough that he could see the fine tremor in her jaw. He left, she said, not asking. You let him leave. The accusation landed like a punch, and Soto didn't flinch, because he deserved it in the way all detectives deserve the anger of families, because they stand at the border between chaos and justice and too often let chaos slip through. We didn't let him, Soto said, voice controlled, careful. We didn't have him in custody. We got the warrant. We moved. He moved faster. Lila's hands clenched into fists at her sides. So now what? She demanded. Now he's gone forever. Her eyes flashed. Or is this what he wants? You chasing him while her voice broke on the last word and she swallowed it like poison, because even speaking the word dead felt like betrayal. Soto brought her into the case room, not because it was policy, but because policy had failed them, and sometimes you have to show a mother the ugly machinery behind the search so she stops thinking you're hiding behind silence. He pointed at the wall, the river bend, the drainage channel, the abandoned house, the landfill route, Rask's apartment, the diner. He showed her the note in an evidence sleeve without letting her touch it. Lila stared at the block letters until her face tightened, like she was staring at a stranger's hand reaching out from the dark. He's talking to us, she whispered. The room felt colder. Then she did something that made the detectives freeze. She reached into her purse and pulled out another envelope. No postage. No return address. Her name printed in neat, careful letters. She'd found it in her mailbox that morning. For a second, nobody moved. The air in the room thickened. Soto's stomach dropped like an elevator cable snapping. "When did you get that?" he asked, voice sharp. "An hour ago," Lila said. "I didn't open it." Her hands were trembling now, the paper shaking like it had its own heartbeat. Soto took the envelope with gloved hands, held it up to the light. The flap was sealed. No obvious powder. No bulge. Still, their minds went to the worst places, because when a case turns into direct contact, you start expecting escalation. They opened it in a controlled area. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a small object wrapped in tissue. The paper had one sentence in the same block lettering. "The river remembers." Soto unfolded the tissue slowly. Inside was a cheap silver heart charm. Not the whole bracelet, just one charm, detached, the jump ring snapped clean. Lila made a sound that hit the room like glass breaking. "That's hers," she said, voice cracking. "That's from her bracelet." Her knees wobbled and she caught herself on the table edge, breathing fast, eyes fixed on the charm like it was radioactive. The detectives stared at it, because it meant what they'd feared: whoever was sending these messages had access to Tessa's belongings. Not just once, not just years ago, but now, either because he had kept them all this time like trophies, or because he knew where to retrieve them. A charm in an envelope is not an accident. It's a signal flare. It's an attempt to control the emotional weather. It's a way of saying, "I decide what surfaces. I decide what you get back." Soto's mind snapped into action. The envelope itself was evidence, fibers, prints, DNA, a postmark absence that narrowed nothing but still mattered. They bagged it, swabbed it, photographed it. They asked Lila to recount her morning in detail. Did she see anyone? Did she hear any car, any footsteps? Did any neighbor's dog bark? Lila shook her head, eyes wide, voice unsteady. "Nothing," she said. "Just there." And that, just there, was the nightmare of it. Someone could walk up to her home and leave a piece of her daughter in her mailbox, and then disappear into daylight. They put a full surveillance team on Lila's block now, not a cheap camera, not a half measure, but cars at either end, officers rotating, hidden lens trained on the mailbox, on the porch, on the street. They warned Lila not to open her mailbox without calling first. Lila laughed, hollow. "So I just don't get mail now," she snapped. "I just don't live in my own house." But she agreed, because the envelope had done what it was meant to do. It had made her afraid of her own front yard. That night, just after midnight, one of the officers watching the block saw a man on foot approach from the corner. He moved with purpose, head down, baseball cap low, hands in pockets. He didn't stumble like a drunk. He didn't linger like a tourist. He walked straight toward Lila's mailbox, paused for half a second, then slipped something inside. The officer's pulse jumped. He whispered into his radio, and the street suddenly filled with silent motion, two unmarked units easing forward, headlights off, doors opening like jaws. The man heard it anyway. Maybe he caught the faint shift of tires on gravel, maybe he sensed eyes, maybe he'd planned for it. He bolted. The chase was short and violent, a blur of boots and breath and cracking branches as the man sprinted between houses, vaulting a fence like his body already knew the route. The officers pursued, shouting, but the man didn't look back. He ran like someone who had practiced escaping. He cut through a backyard and into an alley, then into the darkness behind a row of garages. One officer tackled him near a dumpster, both bodies hitting the ground hard enough to knock the air out of them. The man fought like a cornered animal, elbows, knees, wild strength, and for a second it felt like he might break free. Then two more officers piled on. The man's cap flew off, and in the harsh beam of a flashlight, Soto, arriving breathless, saw his face. Not Rask. Younger. Mid-20s. Narrow jaw. Eyes wide, not with cruelty, but with panic. A kid, almost. He spit blood and cursed and tried to twist away. "I didn't do nothing," he gasped. His voice cracked on the last word like he believed it. They dragged him to the station. His name was Devon Pike. Petty theft history. Known to run errands for older guys in town. No violent priors. No known connection to Tessa Hale, on paper. But paper, again, is polite. Under interrogation, Devon sweated through his hoodie, hands shaking, eyes darting like they were searching for an exit inside the room. Soto put the envelope on the table between them, unopened. "Who told you to put this in the mailbox?" he asked, calm, low, dangerous. Devon swallowed hard. "I don't know," he lied immediately, too fast. Soto leaned in. "You don't run to a specific house on a specific street at midnight with an envelope and not know why," he said. Devon's eyes flickered. "I was paid," he blurted, and then clamped his mouth shut like he'd bitten his own tongue. "How much?" Soto asked. Devon hesitated, then mumbled a number. "Not huge. A few hundred. The kind of money you'd risk trouble for if you were broke enough." Soto's jaw tightened. "Paid by who?" Devon shook his head violently. "Can't," he whispered. "Can't." His eyes were wet now, and he looked less like a criminal and more like a terrified messenger who'd realized too late what he'd been hired to deliver. Soto kept his voice steady. "Devon," he said, "a girl is missing. A family is dying in slow motion. If you know something, you say it." Devon's throat bobbed. "He'll kill me," he breathed. The pronoun again. He. Soto slid a photograph across the table, Owen Rask's mugshot from an old DUI. Devon stared at it for half a second, then flinched like the face had hit him. "No," Devon said quickly. Too quickly. "Not him." Soto watched his eyes, watched the micro-movements, the panic. "Then who?" Soto pressed. Devon closed his eyes, as if bracing for impact. "They call him Fish," he whispered. Soto's spine tightened. "Fish," he repeated. Devon nodded, barely. "I don't know his real name," he said. "Everybody calls him Fish. He's got that ornament, you know? Always got a fish swinging in his car. Like a joke." Devon's voice shook. "He told me to drop the envelope. Told me not to look inside. Told me if I talked, I'd end up," Devon swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "In the river." Soto felt the room tilt slightly. Because the fish ornament wasn't just a detail now. It was a symbol. A calling card. A brand. It had followed the case from the diner to the liquor store to the traffic stop to the note to the messenger's nickname. It wasn't random. It was identity. And suddenly, Rask looked less like the mastermind and more like a face the city had latched onto because they needed a villain with a name. If Fish was real, if Fish was the one pulling strings, then they'd been chasing the wrong shadow, or only one part of it. Soto kept his face neutral, but inside his mind was moving fast, brutal. "Describe him," he said. Devon rubbed his forehead with shaking hands. "Older," he said. 40s maybe. Big shoulders. Not fat. Just solid. Always wears a cap. Always smiles like he's not smiling." Devon looked up, eyes pleading. "He's not like normal dudes," he whispered. "He talks like everything's already decided." Soto's throat tightened, because he'd heard that before, Lila describing a man across the street, face down, cap low, posture like a bouncer. The photograph sender. The mailbox prowler. Devon's Fish. The pieces started to align in a different configuration, and the new shape was uglier than the old one, because it suggested planning on a level they hadn't fully grasped. Rask had vanished, yes. But what if Rask wasn't the one sending the messages? What if Rask was running because he'd been told to run? What if the fish ornament wasn't his signature at all, but the signature of someone he feared? Soto asked Devon where he met Fish. Devon hesitated, then muttered, "Down by the water sometimes. Or at the shop. Not the big shop. The little one off Kersley. The one that ain't really a shop." Soto's pulse jumped. Which one? Devon shook his head, panicking again. I can't, he whispered. Please. Soto stared at him for a long moment, then made a decision. He pushed back from the table and stood. You're going to tell me, he said quietly, because if you don't, you're not the only one who ends up in the river. You understand me? Devon's shoulders sagged. He gave an address in a voice so small it almost disappeared. Soto wrote it down with a pen that felt suddenly heavy, because addresses are real. Addresses can be raided. Addresses can bleed. He left the room and stepped into the hallway where the station's fluorescent lights made every face look sick. He called for a team. He called for backup. He called the lieutenant and told him they had a new name and a new target and a new reason to move fast. And somewhere, out in the dark city beyond the station walls, the river kept sliding past, silent and patient, as if it knew the truth was coming closer, and as if it was already preparing to take something else before anyone could stop it. The address Devon whispered wasn't in the part of Flint that gets postcards, not that Flint got many postcards back then, but this was the kind of street where the city's bones show through, industrial lots with cracked concrete, chain-link fences bowed like tired spines, a row of low buildings squatting under sodium lights that made everything look jaundiced, sickly, already halfway to decay. Soto read the numbers twice, then once more, because a single digit wrong could send them crashing into an innocent man's garage and let the real Shadow slip away laughing. He folded the paper, tucked it into his wallet like it was a weapon, and walked through the station with that tight, coiled energy detectives carry when a case suddenly stops being an idea and becomes a target. They rolled out in a half-dozen cars, no sirens, no drama, just headlights cutting through damp night. Flint's streets were empty in the way late-night streets get empty in cities that don't trust the dark. Storefronts slept behind metal grates. The wind pushed wrappers along the gutter like restless ghosts. Soto sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked Crown Vic, radio crackling low, watching intersections like they might spit out a surprise. Somewhere ahead was a place Devon said wasn't really a shop, and that phrase kept scraping at Soto's mind. Not really a shop. A front. A nest. A door that looked normal until you stepped through and found something waiting. They arrived 2 blocks away and killed their lights, engines idling like restrained animals. The building sat at the end of a narrow lane behind a closed auto parts store, a squat structure with a roll-up bay door and a side entrance painted the color of old bruises. A flickering security light buzzed overhead, stuttering like a bad pulse. No sign. No open hours. Just a faint smell of oil and solvent in the air, sharp enough to bite the back of the throat. On the wall by the side door, half hidden under grime, someone had spray-painted a fish. Simple outline. Cartoonish. Mocking. It wasn't art. It was a marker. Soto felt the hair on his arms rise. He nodded once, and the team moved. Boots on gravel, quiet and fast. One unit covered the alley mouth. Another covered the back lot. 2 officers took the bay door, gloved hands ready to yank it up. Soto and his partner went for the side entrance. The plan was clean on paper: breach, secure, search, seize. But plans don't account for the way adrenaline makes time bend, the way silence can feel like a scream. Soto raised his hand, counted down with his fingers, and on 0 the ram hit the door. Wood splintered. The lock gave with a sharp crack. The officers poured in with flashlights and shouted commands that bounced off bare walls. The interior smelled like stale smoke, old rubber, and something faintly sweet, antifreeze, or rot, or both. The beams swept across scattered tires, a greasy workbench, shelves lined with unlabeled cans. For a second it looked like a junkie garage. For a second. Then Soto's light caught the far corner where the floor dipped slightly, and something glinted, a chain bolted into concrete. Heavy duty. Industrial. Not for towing. Not for work. Clear, someone shouted from the back. Another officer kicked open a small office door. Papers flew. A chair overturned. The place was empty of people, but it was full of intent. Empty doesn't mean safe. Empty can mean recently warned. Recently cleaned. Recently prepared. Soto moved deeper, eyes sharp, pulse steady in that professional way that disguises fear as focus. He crouched near the chain bolt and ran his gloved fingers along the metal. Fresh scratch marks. Recent use. He looked up and followed the chain to a thick padlock hanging loose, as if someone had unhooked it and left in a hurry. There was a faint stain on the floor near the bolt, dark, irregular, not enough to declare blood, but enough to make his stomach tighten. A tech snapped photos. Another officer pulled out evidence bags. Soto kept moving, because the building had the atmosphere of a place where time had been spent in bad ways. In the back, a narrow door led to a stairwell descending into darkness. The air coming up from below was colder, damp, and carried that unmistakable mildew smell that basements have when they've held too many secrets. Soto signaled, and 2 officers took point. They went down slowly, flashlights carving tunnels through black. The steps creaked. At the bottom, a second room opened up, larger than it should have been under a building like this. Concrete walls. A drain in the center of the floor. Hooks screwed into beams. A cheap folding table. A stained top rolled in the corner. The whole place looked like it had been designed for things you didn't do in daylight. One officer swallowed hard. Another whispered, "Jesus," like it was the only word that fit. Soto didn't speak. He walked the perimeter, light sweeping. On the wall, there were scratches at shoulder height, long and frantic, like fingernails on paint. He forced himself not to imagine. He made himself note. Document. Measure. Because imagination is poison in investigations, you need facts, even when your gut is screaming. In a metal cabinet, they found gloves. Contractor bags. A roll of duct tape. A coil of rope. A bottle of bleach. A stack of cheap disposable phones still in packaging, like someone bought them in bulk. In another drawer, IDs. Not Tessa's, different names, different faces, all snapped or bent or scratched through, like trophies that had been punished. A pile of women reduced to plastic rectangles and broken smiles. The room went colder. The officers looked at each other without speaking, because everyone was thinking the same thing, and it made their mouths dry. If this place had been used like they feared, then Tessa's case was not a one-off tragedy. It was part of a pattern. A habit. A hunger. Soto found a notebook on the table, pages torn out, cover greasy. He flipped through. Most of it was blank, but toward the back there were numbers written in blocky handwriting, dates, times, addresses, some crossed out, some circled. One address was Lila's Street. The next line beneath it, River Bend. The ink looked fresh enough to still have shine. Soto felt a hard knot form behind his sternum. The messages weren't just taunts. They were entries. Plans. A schedule of fear. He bagged the notebook. He motioned for the tech to photograph the whole room. He turned to the stairwell, and for a split second he caught a sound, distant, faint, like a muffled engine. His head snapped up. "Hold," he whispered, and everyone froze. The sound came again. A car, outside, close. Gravel crunch. A door slam. And then footsteps above them, heavy, deliberate. Soto's pulse spiked. The building wasn't empty after all. Upstairs, officers shifted into position, weapons drawn. The tension in the air thickened, electric. The steps on the floorboards paused, as if whoever had entered was listening too. A voice called out from the main room, low, casual, almost amused. "Y'all got busy quick." Soto moved up the stairs, every sense sharpened. At the top, he stepped into the main space and saw him, standing near the workbench, hands raised, not in surrender but in performance. Baseball cap low. Broad shoulders. Solid build. The kind of man who looks like he could work construction or break you in half. His face was in partial shadow, but his eyes caught the flashlight beam, and there was no surprise in them. Only a calm, confident interest. Like he'd walked into a theater and found the show already playing. "Police," an officer barked. "Don't move." The man smiled without warmth, I ain't moving, he said. His voice was smooth, controlled. Not panicked. Not confused. The voice of someone who's had years to rehearse being unbothered. Soto stepped forward, keeping distance. Devon Pike says you paid him, Soto said, voice low. You the one they call Fish? The man's smile widened just slightly, like he enjoyed hearing his own nickname in a cop's mouth. People call me all kinds of things, he said. Depends what they want. What I want, Soto said, is your name. The man tilted his head. Names don't matter much, he replied. Not in Flint. He glanced around at the officers. Whole cities full of men with names nobody cares about. Soto felt the urge to lunge, to break protocol, to grab the cap and force the truth out by sheer violence of need, but need doesn't hold up in court. He stayed controlled. Hands on the wall, he ordered. Now. The man complied slowly, like he was savoring every second. He turned, placed his palms against the cinder block. His jacket pulled tight over his shoulders, and for a brief moment the beam caught something on his wrist, a faint pale line, like an old rope burn. An officer moved in to cuff him. And that's when the garage bay door screamed. It didn't just open, it flew up with a metallic roar, yanked from outside, and cold air slammed into the building like a punch. Headlights flooded the space. A dark vehicle idled in the alley, engine snarling, and someone inside shouted, "Move." The man at the wall moved like he'd been waiting for the cue. He drove his elbow back into the officer's face, hard, snapping the man's head sideways. Another officer grabbed at him, but Fish twisted, ducked, and slammed a shoulder into the nearest shelf, sending cans and tools raining down. The room erupted into motion, shouts, footsteps, the clatter of metal. Fish sprinted toward the open bay, fast for a man his size, like adrenaline had been stored in him for years. Soto chased, heart hammering. He saw Fish's silhouette cut through headlight glare. He saw the dark vehicle, older sedan, Fish ornament swinging in the windshield like a taunting pendulum. The driver's face was obscured, but the posture looked familiar, too, lean, quick, prepared. Fish dove into the passenger seat. Soto raised his weapon, aiming at the tire, the rear quarter panel, anything that would stop the escape without killing. But in that split second, an officer stumbled into his line of fire, and Soto hesitated, because the one thing worse than losing a suspect is shooting your own. The sedan surged forward, tires spitting gravel, and shot into the street. Go! Soto shouted, and the chase detonated into the city. Unmarked cars roared to life, sirens finally cutting through the night like a blade, echoing off warehouses. The sedan blew through a stop sign, swerved around a pothole like the driver knew every crack in Flint's skin. The Fish ornament whipped back and forth with each turn, a frantic metronome. Soto clung to the dash as his driver pushed the Vic to its limits, speed climbing, street lights strobing overhead. The sedan took them toward the river. Of course it did. They barreled down a road that narrowed into industrial back lanes, fences whipping by, dumpsters flashing in headlights. The sedan made a hard turn onto the access route near the drainage channel, tires squealing, and for a moment the scent of the river hit them, mud and water and rust, the smell of a city's secrets. The sedan's brake lights flared, then it cut its lights completely. Black. The pursuit car rushed into the darkness, and in that instant the world became only headlights and the sound of an engine ahead. The sedan disappeared into a maze of unlit turns, and Soto's driver cursed, scanning. Where the hell? A sudden shape loomed, an abandoned truck parked at an angle across the lane, hidden until the last second. The Vic's tires screamed as the driver swerved, barely missing the truck's rear. The maneuver cost them speed. Cost them sight. Cost them the edge. By the time they cleared the obstacle, the sedan was gone. The sirens behind them wailed like mourning. Cars converged, lights sweeping across empty pavement, officers jumping out, flashlights stabbing the dark. They searched the immediate area, fences, brush, the riverbank itself. A helicopter wasn't available. It never was. The city didn't have that kind of reach. They had boots and beams and anger. A patrol unit found fresh tire tracks near a narrow path leading down toward the water. The ground was soft, churned, and the tracks stopped abruptly, like the car had parked and someone had moved fast. Officers followed the path with weapons drawn, hearts pounding. At the bottom, near a concrete culvert, they found something that made the whole group go still. A second fish ornament. Not hanging. Not swinging. Lying in the mud like it had been dropped on purpose. Soto stepped closer and picked it up with gloved fingers. Plastic. Cheap. The kind you'd win from a claw machine or buy at a gas station. But it felt heavier than it should have, because it was a message written in objects. You almost had me. You still don't. Keep looking. He stared at the river beside the culvert, black and moving, swallowing light. The water made a soft sound as it slid past, like it was whispering, like it was laughing at how small they were. Back at the shop, the basement evidence sat bagged and catalogued, and the officers who'd stayed behind reported something that punched Soto in the gut. The sedan had likely been waiting nearby, listening. The escape wasn't luck. It was coordination. Someone had eyes on the building. Someone had been ready to extract fish the moment police arrived. Which meant the network was real. Which meant this wasn't one man with trophies. It was a structure. They brought Devon Pike out again and pressed him harder, because now the threat had teeth. Devon trembled in the chair, eyes swollen from crying or sleep deprivation. When Soto told him fish had been there, had escaped, Devon's face collapsed. I'm dead, he whispered. I'm already dead. Soto leaned in, voice low. You help me, you live, he said. It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but he said it anyway, because sometimes you weaponize hope the way criminals weaponize fear. You tell me who drove the car. Devon shook his head violently. I never seen the driver's face, he said. He keeps it dark. Always. Like he's not a person. Devon swallowed hard. Fish ain't the top, he added, voice cracking. He ain't. Soto's stomach tightened. Then who is? Devon stared at the table as if the grain in the wood could answer for him. They got a name, he whispered. The old heads. The ones who've been around forever. They call him Current. The word landed in the room like a cold drop of water down your spine. Current. Not a person. A force. A thing that moves and drags and decides where bodies end up. Soto held Devon's gaze. Current, he repeated, tasting it. That who sent the photos? That who's been leaving things in the mailbox? Devon didn't answer, but his silence was louder than any confession. In the early morning hours, Soto drove alone to the river again, because the case kept circling back to it like a planet trapped in a doomed orbit. He parked near the bend, engine off, and sat in the dark with the fish ornament on the passenger seat. He watched the water slide past under the street lamp's weak glow, the same glow in the photographs, the same glow that had become an icon of terror for one family and a private altar for someone else. He thought about the basement room with chains and hooks, the snapped IDs, the concrete slab in the abandoned house, the hardware store purchases, the missing witness who fled, the gunshots near the spur. He thought about how easy it is for a city to lose people when the city itself has been bleeding for years. And he felt it, deep in his chest, the quiet dread that this case wasn't moving toward closure. It was widening. It was revealing a shape bigger than one missing girl. Bigger than one suspect. Bigger than one river. It was a web that had been spun slowly, patiently, and now that the light had touched it, the spider wasn't retreating. It was moving. Somewhere out there, fish had slipped back into the dark sedan and vanished into Flint's veins. Somewhere out there, someone called Current was still watching, still deciding what to reveal and what to drown. And somewhere, in the water that never screamed, the river kept carrying time downstream, carrying secrets like silt, carrying the unanswered question of a 17-year-old girl who stepped into the cold night in 2003 and never made it home.